Your Excellency Shamsaran, co-chair of Indo-Bhutan Dialogue, Life Trustee of IIC, Your Excellency Kapila Vatsyayan, Chairperson of the Research Division of IIC, distinguished lamas, scholars. I thought that I will sketch a general background of what is to come in the next 2 days, and the topics that I would briefly sketch are the journey of Tantric Buddhism to the north as it disappears in India, and hence its storage and flourishing elsewhere for us to recoup now. I also thought that because of the major translation that took place under Guru's leadership, I will bring to your attention the tremendous linguistic impact it had in taking Sanskrit concepts into Tibetan language, and from there to languages throughout the Himalayas. So the lexical impact of Guru's work. Of course, it is very familiar for all of us we all know about it, but I would like to recall the impact on literature, poetry, arts and architecture as Tantric Buddhism traveled north. And if I may, I could also touch a little bit within the 40 minutes or so given to me, the syncretism and inclusivity of Guru's teaching, because it made its openness made incorporation of many other ideas. And then lastly, I think there will be many speakers who will touch on all aspects I am mentioning in much greater detail. But I think I will touch on the peace, the security, and the idea of hidden land, which must fulfill both external and internal peace. What does it mean today? And lastly, one cannot avoid discussing about the so-called terma literature and phenomena of Tertons, who are reviving Buddhism under very difficult conditions around the world today. So this, if you could excuse me, these are the sort of humble areas I would like to cover. Nothing new at all, because all these topics are so well known to Geshes, Rinpoches, Tulkus, Buddhist scholars. But what else can I do? I'm not I never revealed the teachings to myself or to others. I cannot say anything new. So please excuse me. So to begin with, I called my humble talk the Timeless Guru. So that implies what it can offer to contemporary societies. Let me begin. The stream of high cultural exchange in the Himalayas, between the Himalayas and India, that began between three persons: the Guru of Udyana, Shanta Rakshita of Zahor, some say Jesor, and Emperor Trisongdetsen of Tibet, is what is being discussed today in India International Centre. Meaning it is also, we are also revisiting the same kind of high cultural exchange that took place there. And they had profound visions that has played out over 12 centuries now. And for renewing this transcultural and trans-Himalayan vision, I would really like to thank His Excellency Shamsaran and Dr. Arun Kapoor, who is Secretary of the India-Bhutan Dialogue, as well as Director of Royal Academy in Paro, and chairperson of CF. I think the dialogue of this sort, which His Excellency Shamsaran and Dr. Arun Kapoor has launched, brings a very different value to the discussion, which is usually concentrated on strategic interest and strategic affairs and sort of international assistance and that sort of thing. And so we are able to now be independent of all those obsessive discussions sometimes. The value of today's conference, tomorrow's conference, is that we are able to delineate much longer, much deeper perception of the whole Himalayan region, the collaboration that went on. But from a spiritual point of view, it's also a meritorious circumstance, because we are able to pay, not through prayers, but through this sort of discussion, homage to Guru Rinpoche, who, according to historian Kyungan Yingpo or Jonang Taranatha, who wrote the Indian version of the life of Guru, said that he was born sometimes in the reign of King Devapala of Magadha. Falls roughly between 730 and 777. And we from Bhutan are very grateful for this occasion to be able to join other distinguished speakers, very high luminaries amongst us, consisting of Rinpoches, Geshes, meditators, scholars, filmmakers, journalists, scholars, historians, painters. And I want to recognize most respectfully, really, the highly reputed Lama and international best-selling writer, Yonji Mingyur Rinpoche, right here. And recognize also most respectfully our fellow Bhutanese Lama, Netin Cholgen Rinpoche. In traditional expression, it would be like saying that this crowd is ornamented by their brilliance and by their presence, blessed presence. And of course, Tuku Jigme Rinpoche here, who's a son of one of the great Tertons living amongst us today. He's in India, of course. To say something about Rinpoches in our midst, like jewels, Netin Choekay Rinpoche, a fellow Bhutanese who lives, of course, again in India, his incarnation goes back to Chogyal Mingyur Limpa, the highly productive writer, and Prince Muruk Tsempo, the prince of Emperor Trisong Densen. And in that sense, we feel history is very short, it's very circular. He is present amongst us. We can see and touch him, but he is an 8th century figure. I also want to thank His Eminence Tuklak Samten Dorji Rinpoche, who is representing the central monk body of Bhutan, which has the most unbroken, continuous institutional history of a religious body, perhaps in the world. Others had to shift. There were break and ruptures in between, but not the central monastic body of Bhutan, since it was founded sometimes in 1630s. And then, of course, I want to recognize the presence of Hung Tampa Senamka Dorji, whose tremendous work in Kalimpong, Darjeeling, Nepal, Britain, etc., is marvelous. Plus, also Khenpo Losang Sultim Bhutia and Khenpo Pema. I'm very sorry I have to go through this, but I do feel it merits, their participation merits mention yet. Now, Guru is praised as Guru of three times, past, future, present. Embodiment of three kayas. Embodiment also of Lama, Yidam, and Khandro. So, in this respect, it's very challenging for an ordinary person like me with ordinary perception. I am not Lama, I am not Tuku, I am not meditator. So very difficult for me to discuss Guru Rinpoche. But my merit is only that I am a citizen of Bhutan, and Bhutan is the last Vajrayana kingdom. So in that sense, I take this not only as an honor, but perhaps in some sense a small spokesperson for an important country. So I must emphasize that Guru's introduction of Vajrayana Buddhism is new, but not introduction of Buddhism, because Buddhism had existed in both Tibet and Bhutan before Guru Rinpoche, as we know from the establishment of Buddhist temples which exist today intact in Bhutan, established by Songtsen Gampo, Emperor Songtsen Gampo in 6th century. But what is new is the bringing of the Vajrayana Buddhism. Guru comes to Bhutan at the royal invitation of someone called King Siddharaja, who was based in Bumthang. And this is according to the thermal literature of Bhutan, which was discovered much later, like all thermal literatures. They are not contemporaneous, they are later retrospective writing. He's supposed to have arrived in Bhutan in mid-8th century, but when I estimate in relation to the confirmed dates of the establishment Samye, it turns out to be little later, but much before Samye was constructed in 775. On his second visit to Bhutan, he empowers and gives instruction of the 8 Herukas to Kaji Dishidipa to the 2 persons whom he has gathered for peacemaking, that is a king from India and the king of Bumthang. So this because of this visit and because of the blessings, instructions, empowerment he gave to the king of Bhutan, His Majesty the King of Bhutan, His revered Majesty, always expresses his aspiration to 2 figures in all of his public addresses, whether to the parliament or to the nation on the national day. And one is to the founder of Bhutan, who is also a monk, and the second is to Guru Rinpoche, to seek his blessings. And I would like to do the same for this conference. And the blessing not only for this conference, but the renewal and continuation of the very purpose of this conference in honor of the 50th anniversary between Bhutan and India's diplomatic relationship. Now, India and Bhutan, to be very honest, are quite different countries, very asymmetric, very different. And it is quite a wonder how these 2 asymmetric different countries, different histories, values has gone on marvelously over the last 50 years. They have been, I think, able to work together. They have found appreciation for each other's histories and values. And they have been sensitive to each other's long-term interest, I think. Of course, in any relationship, long-term interest of each other must be taken into account. That's fundamental. So, the terma-based history of Bhutan opens, Buddhist history books for children actually opens with peacemaking by Guru Rinpoche between 2 warring kings, king of Mon, as Bhutan was known then, and the king of a border region of India. And this spiritually charged resolution of the conflict in mid-8th century is very often taken by the Buddhists to be symbolic of the lasting peace between these 2 countries. Of course, India being such a large country, with slightly different orientation, never remembers this. But today is a good occasion for both of us to take this into account. Now I would like to recall the that the northward journey of Buddhism out of India, vast landscape, Mongolia, China, Tibet, and Khotan, all these places really owes to Guru Rinpoche. This is very well known amongst the Buddhists, but I thought I would like to bring this to the audience in India. But let's also remember in sort of broad outlines what India looked like at that time, or what region looked like politically and artistically at that time. Because there was a lot of creative influences, mutual influence between Hinduism and Buddhism going on at that time. By 723, Kathmandu had been founded, and Kathmandu became a hotbed of Tantric Buddhism, as you all know. Kashmir was ruled by king, of course, Lalitaditya Muktabit. Kashmiri Saivism that drew on Khala Tantrika practices. And this was, of course, as you all know, later refined great deal in 10th century by Abhinavagupta, who began to discuss on very detailed and very fascinating things like consciousness of consciousness and reflexivity, etc. This also had influence on Buddhism as time went on. Of course, I think his writings, which have now been translated in English, are very important for aesthetics and phenomenology. By 750, Palas were beginning to rule eastern India. And of course, you all know their impact on aesthetics of statue making, painting, and so on, which also fed in later to Tibet and mingled with Chinese art to some extent. By 750 also, temples of Puri devoted to Jagannathan had been founded by Adi Shankaracharya. Adi Shankaracharya is a contemporary of Guru Rinpoche, but it would have been most fascinating if there some record of their meeting, but there doesn't seem to be any. Anyway, Adi Shankara had a great impact on Hinduism, as you know. And in intellectual honesty, I must say that it had also a huge negative impact on Buddhism. You all know this very much. But anyway, both figures, great impact on Hinduism and Buddhism. Kamarupa kingdom, which had Kamalkya, etc., is very much mentioned in biography of Guru Rinpoche. And of course, the Maru kingdom in Jamba, I just looked at history of Ladakh and Himachal Pradesh, seems to have been there. And in Bhutan, the Mon kingdom, mentioned in old texts, Mon kingdom. Bhutan, how it was called before, the Mon kingdom. Now, in the list of numerous political dynasties, the Pala king Gopala I opens Odantapuri, and his successor, appropriately named King Dharmapala, also opens Brahmasila, which produced Shantarakshita as its chief abbot, who then went to Tibet to ordain monks and promote Buddhism. Odantapuri and Brahmasila were part of the sort of 5 great monasteries in India in the mid-8th century. But I think it's important to recall that outside these great monasteries there was a lot of tantric practices going on. And Alex Wayman, sort of translated Guha Samajya Tantra, etc., says that the Tantra pre-existed in substance before the word was used in Guha Samajya Tantra, which circulated for the first time in eastern India, in a country called Vanga, which was later Bengal. The word Vanga occurs in the biography of Guru Rinpoche. Well, all I wanted to say was that there was a great deal of mutual influence between Buddhism and Hinduism, Tantra at that time. And during this great creative Milu, Guru Rinpoche was able to catalyze transmission of Tantric Buddhism out of India in a place totally new, culturally different, politically very different. Of course, we know that Tantric Buddhism had already entered China in the 7th century, in the Tang dynasty, and it became much more entrenched after the arrival of Indian masters Vajrabodhi and Amukha Vajra, according to women. Now the story of imperial invitation of Guru from Guru to build Samye and introduce Tantric Buddhism is very familiar to all of us to need any repetition. But let me say that in retrospect, the most important thing in the imperial period of China, imperial period of Tibet, from 618 to 842, was the import of Buddhism from India. A completely foreign religion, through establishment of it as a state religion in Tibet, and then its establishment as a state religion later on in most of the Himalayan kingdoms. Now, of course, we all know that it was not without challenge. There was a debate between Buddhist and the Chinese view of enlightenment. There was debate between so-called indigenous religion of Tibet, Bon, and Buddhism. But at the end, this foreign religion was implanted. And as Ronald Davidson has remarked, Tibet eventually displaced India itself as the perceived source of Buddhism and study of Buddhism. But what does conversion of a nation mean? What does it mean? Conversion of a nation to Tantric Buddhism, according to Matthew Capston's, means the gradual transformation of cosmological framework, of rituals, of intellectual and bureaucratic practices, and of historical myths and narratives. So gradually it percolates even to myths and narratives about one's own past. Now the emergence of Tibet as a reference point of Buddhism after a brief fragmentation between 842 and 1000 continued with further import of Buddhist teaching from various countries, but mostly from India. So the perpetuation of Vajrayana Buddhism in Tibet and in the Himalayas due to Guru's initial diffusion of it as state religion in these polities, while it gradually phased away in India, is the first reason for us to celebrate Guru Rinpoche today. As the popular biographer of Kublai Khan put it, this is John Mann, Tibet was to become the chief inheritor of Indian Buddhism. As you know from contemporary situation, the relationship between Kublai Khan and Tibet through his imperial preceptor, Dogen Satyapa Dogen Papa Lodgelsen, had a very controversial effect in the 20th century in terms of justification, as Your Excellency very much knows. However, let me summarize this section by stressing that the northward division of Buddhism centered around Tibet has since then been sustained in Mongolia, parts of China, but most indestructibly in the Himalayas, especially in the eastern Himalayas. Now there is very lively interest in Buddhism in other places too, but we can hardly predict what size it will be. Today in the world as a whole, only about 10% are Buddhist. That is a very, very relatively small size compared to what it was as a culture in the past, in the 6th, 7th, 8th century. With the exception of Bhutan, no official patronage of Vajrayana Buddhism is likely. Although historically the march of Buddhism went with benign state support. It's not only relevance of Buddhism, but how much support it enjoys is important question. Practically, actually, no religion does too well without some support from the state, despite whatever claim is about secularism and so on and so forth. However, the teachings of Buddha, whom Guru spread through another skillful means, speak more and more to the hyper-realistic technological world we find ourselves in today. Modern technological society is pierced and pervaded with what Baudrillard called hyper-reality, where what is real and what is false is so difficult to distinguish, so difficult to be aware, so difficult to perceive because they blend so well. But which seizes, this hyper-reality seizes our consciousness, our moment-to-moment attention, and creates very unstable attention. So there lies the everyday challenge related to Buddhism and its main question, the main question of what is real, which the speakers here, because of their philosophical, psychological, academic understanding, will elaborate in the next 2 days. And that will be of contemporary relevance today, because attention and consciousness is the fundamental question. Now, to change the subtopic a little bit, I would like to emphasize that the northerly diffusion of Buddhism could not have happened without monumental translation carried out by Guru Rinpoche and other 108 translators, Tibetan translators. And in what has come to be known as early or ancient transmission during Guru Rinpoche's time, to be differentiated from middle transmission and later transmission of Buddhism, texts from India, and I suspect very strongly some texts from Nepal, were translated mostly in Samye Scriptoria and Samye Library. And these texts were later diffused, as you all know, by Guru Rinpoche and his closest 25 disciples. Though an overwhelming number of texts were translated from Sanskrit, texts were also translated from languages of Udiana, Kashmir, Zahor, Singhala, I don't know where it is, perhaps Sri Lanka, perhaps some other countries, and Chinese. The Terma biography of Guru Rinpoche, Pema Kathang, lists the number and the type and the titles of the sutras and tantras that were translated in Samye. Some 252 I counted, and it took 13 long years. Translation itself was preceded by sending 108 Tibetan translators for training, most probably to Kashmir and in this Gangetic plains. And those training today, if you want to call, would be called philological and linguistic studies, but there seems to be a large number of foreigners or Indians employed in the translation in Samye. And going through Pema Kathang, I found that Guru's translation team in Samye paid in kind with gold, Tibetan gold dust, included many Indian sounding names like Dhanasila, Jinamitra, Salendra Bodhi, Parvata, Dharmasila, Surendra, Dharmasri, Sarkar Sri, Samanta Sri, Sri Baladhara, Sarjana Deva, Rakshita, Bhadra, Jnana Garbha, Sarjana Deva, Sakya Siddha, Prajna Varman, and so forth. if it were not for my history honors training, I would not be even able to translate this today. But I couldn't, so I left it like this. The act of translation was not only textual. Culture behind the text was being translated at that moment. Given this is the case, translation of key official, scientific and literary texts and important vernacular writings of a society into other languages of interest warrants, in my opinion, deep official support, because today most of the time important documents are outsourced to some commercial firms to translate, and this creates major incoherent thought pieces. This is quite a phenomenon in Bhutan today, that the laws are framed, I don't know from what sort of concept, and we find very difficult to match later on with any indigenous concept. I think Honorable Chairperson of NC and Honorable Member of Parliament, Dasho Tashi, etc. are there. It's a very serious problem of conceptual incoherence, in my opinion. But must be so in India also. The stability of choekay, the literary language of Tibet, which was formed by this translation and indigenous heritage, is attributed to the lexicography and style followed in the translation in the Samye under Guru. Matthew Kapstens has noted that the archaic literary Tibetan known from Dunhuang, the old royal inscriptions and other early sources, gradually falls out of use. But the style of choekay writing found in the translation during Guru's time is perfectly understood and used today. A language remaining without change for 1200 years, 12 centuries is quite exceptional, because most of the languages have changed. In the case of English, if you read medieval English, you cannot understand anything unless you deploy specialists. So, and in India, many classical languages have fallen out of use, so you can understand this. In the course of time, the portability of texts that were translated into classical choekay meant not only the dissemination of literacy, thoughts and practices implied in those texts, but the language of choekay itself percolated into all the major languages and dialects of the Himalayas. We find evidence of linguistic borrowing from choekay in many West, Central and East Buddhist languages, and also into non-Buddhist languages like Sharshopa or Sangla, which is used in Arunachal Pradesh in eastern Bhutan. Many nouns referring to spiritual and phenomenological concepts, linguistic designations in theology, philosophy and rituals are shared amongst numerous tongues of the Himalayas, providing a common currency and becoming a shared artifact across the Himalayas. And if it were not for British colonization, actually today our conference might be held in one kind of Hindi or in choekay or Tibetan, But this is where we are. We have to take a detour and talk in English. It was not only choekay, the literary language of Himalayas. I would like to bring to your attention, it's not only choekay that has been affected by translation and transliteration of Sanskrit text of Buddhist kind. The translation of Buddhist texts in Sanskrit has had a profound influence on other major languages. For example, over the period of 1,000 years, from 2nd to 12th century, translation of Buddhist text in Sanskrit, a phonogram language, into Chinese, which is a logogram language, resulted in enormous additions of lexicons into medieval Chinese. The count is 35,000 words that enriched, and this comes from Victor Meyer, the main sort of linguistic scholar. Let me now turn briefly to the impacts of Guru on well-known impacts actually on literature, arts and architecture, to present a fleeting background also of detailed presentations coming from the speakers in this conference. Later they will speak in detail. Now the building of somewhere between 1775 and 1779, supposedly modeled on Bihar's Odintapuri, and its consecration by Guru Rinpoche was a major landmark. Its layout depicted the cosmogram of the Indian world system, with Mount Meru in the center and sort of other four major and 8 minor sort of worlds. Now, Same had been renovated many times. In the last one, during the reign of the 6th Dalai Lama, Sangyang Jamso, who is a paternal descendant of a Bhutanese, great Terton Pema Lingpa actually. But of course, Sangyang Jamso is more known not because his paternity goes back to Bhutanese person, but because he was one of the greatest poet, or rather romantic poet actually. All the young people today who wants to send messages seriously has to depend on the composition of the 6th Dalai Lama. Now Same, nobody knows about the original structure of Same, but its architecture on the third floor is supposed to be Indian, second floor is supposed to be Chinese architecture, and the ground floor or the first floor is supposed to be Tibetan architecture, expressing cross-cultural synthesis, but perhaps also political compromise, because the power play between Chinese and Tibetan influence was quite intense in the court of Emperor Trisong Detsen. But somehow he navigated at the end. Somewhere which means literally inconceivable, was unimaginable, not only due to its creative architecture in the 8th century, but also because it was designed as a library housing Buddhist texts as well as Sanskrit originals. Now, because of this sort of architectural impact, there are countless sites that are attributed to Guru where people have built monuments. Public spaces like temples and chortens have distinctive functions as a counterpoint to the conventional human activities. People, you must have seen, circumambulate contemplatively and attempt to break normal discursive thinking, foregoing their daily preoccupations and foregoing briefly their anxieties. Not only are they places of prostration and circumambulation, from my humble observation, they attempt to reconfigure our consciousness, however briefly, by integrating body, mind and sound experiences, while chanting, circumambulating and prostrating at the same time. Same, built by Guru, did the same. Another one built by Guru, supposedly in his earlier life, was Bodhanath temple in Kathmandu. It illustrates, the Bodhanath is quite interesting. It illustrates, in my opinion, a tenacious hold or grip of a Vajrayana space to foster alternative thinking, alternative concentration, arising from re-empowering of our mind, body and sound, and thus the awareness of being, which is central focus of Abhinava Gupta, whose work I think entered into Tantric Buddhism. And it's remarkable how a place like Bodhanath functions in the midst of very money-minded and very commercially intense surrounding. Incidentally, Se Hung Tampa is there. He's the sort of chief of the restoration and activities of Bodhanath, I think. So I think he might give us more information. The last major region-wide impact of Guru Rinpoche is on the arts, from the great literature of amazing writer like Ugen Lingpa, who brings out most of the terma literature, including the set of books that are attributed to Guru Rinpoche himself, Bumdenga and Pelpoche, Tingizin Gido. And Tingizin Gido is a sort of kind of explanation of how you can develop concentration in 1 lakh ways. 1 lakh ways. Many other types of terma literature, terma cycles of teaching, philosophies, poetry, hagiography, and guides to hidden places have been spawned over the century after the first burst of terma literature during the collapse of the Tibetan Empire in the 9th and 10th centuries. Inspiration of Guru to reveal and compose terma literature have been felt far and wide since then, and that is the sort of life force of literature in these areas. In Bhutan, both Longchenpa and great Terton Vidyadhara Pemalingpa and Terton Ratnalingpa produce new terma teaching cycles, while in Sikkim, great Vidyadhara like Lhachin Namkhajime, who produce many ritual texts, including the Ryu Sangche, produce many cycles of teaching. Among the impact on the arts are also dances specific to Guru, such as Guru Tsenge, which was first rebuilt, not in dance form, but in writing form by Ugen Lingpa, and later was developed by Tertin Guru Cheong into a dance form. And I think Dr. Karma will probably speak more about this kind of dances inspired by association with Guru Rinpoche. Such things as Damising Acham from Bhutan, which has been recognized as part of UNESCO World Heritage. Early images of both paintings and statue show Guru and his consort in less ornaments and less elaborate clothes than what we have seen in the gallery. The accelerating trend has been to incorporate more and more colorful brocade all over them, thus making the images seem like advertisements for silk factories, in my opinion. As a humble painter, I have some difference with that sort of elaboration. The most misleading aspect of this trend is the draping of Khandogiki Sogyal, the chief consort of Guru Rinpoche, in Kashmiri style clothes, complete with tiara and scarf and such things. Not only Guru Padmasambhava, the painting of 25 closest disciples of Guru and their emanations, the different manifestation of Guru according to Sambal Hindu and Parshilamse, have led to diversified images of Guru in various different postures. But nothing in arts compare in scope and popularity to the iconography of Guru Rinpoche himself, usually depicted with Mandarawa on one side and Yeshisogel on the other. I think this owes to the fact that painters wanted to be Indo-Tibetan centric, because they excluded all other consorts from this picture. What we notice in the iconography is that the measurement applied to Buddha is also applied to Guru. But the heavy folds, heavy dresses, hats, hand objects differ radically to represent sacred Mantrayana. Eventually, in my humble opinion, representation of the image of Guru, particularly in iconographic, symbolic and abstracted painting, is to support and facilitate visualization. This is my pet submission to all of you. But if you depart from abstracted symbolic painting, you have to reach realistic painting. But if you do realistic painting, in my opinion, visualization is not possible successfully. In my opinion, meditative visualization of the body of Guru is not only for the so-called generation stage. Meditative visualization is a mimetic experience to build cognitive capacity for non-linguistic, detailed image graphing with color and form. Capacity of generation of color and form in topographical detail, it seems to me, is not at all developed in human beings. Beyond having rather a perception of a thing and recognizing it when we see it, rather we are extraordinarily developed in linguistic way, but that also seems to bias us towards discursive thinking with serious consequences for mental peace, for attention, concentration. However, let me leave aside the discussion of the relationship between imagery outside in an iconography, imagery inside our mind-body, and the relationship between the two through our perception of our imagery outside. I would like to stress that meditative visualization in combination with breathing, withholding under technically correct method to slow down breathing cycle and slow down heartbeat is often the main part of meditation. Let me now move on to say that we could visualize Guru as syncretic, inclusivist in inconceivable ways, to use today's terminologies, and Dr. Arun mentioned about that already. As regards syncretism, let me give 4 instances. Firstly, Guru absorbed selectively tantras and dharanas from other traditions in India. His incorporation of them was part of the creative mutual influence between Hinduism and Buddhism between 4th and 5th centuries onwards. As Wayman has pointed out, the Buddhist Tantra is deeply indebted to certain later Upanishads, which were probably composed in the main form about the 1st century BC to the beginning of the Gupta period. Tantric practices were kept secret within the cults, but they became more accessible outside the cults in the 8th century, the period when Guru diffused Tantric Buddhism. Secondly, Syncretism was part of a longer-term influence Guru begot. The practice of Vajrayana Buddhism Guru left behind in the Himalayas was accessible and open to absorb practices and techniques from Bon, animistic rites, and other native beliefs, notwithstanding the narrative of the oppositional but friendly debate between Bon and Buddhists in the imperial court of Trisong, Ralpachin and Langdharma. A lot of Bon and local folk beliefs have thrived alongside Vajrayana in the Himalayas, not only path towards enlightenment, but ordinary rituals about longevity and prosperity, crop and livestock health, fear and anxiety have been incorporated, which addresses practical help to the people. Guru seemed to have certainly appreciated the value of Bon texts. To quote Pema Khathang, during the translation in Samay, the Bon doctrine and the text on calculations and medicine were translated by Vairocana into mixed languages, and also the sutras and mantras. Vairocana wrote down the versions of the mantras and the versions of the Bon texts. I'm just quoting. Even math texts were translated. Indra and Vairocana wrote down the versions of mathematical text, says Pema Khathang. Incidentally, I'm very pleased to say that Bhutanese have been recognized as the emanation of the great translator Vairocana. I personally witnessed highly precocious behavior of this child monk, not at all expected of a kid of that age. I should give only 2 further examples to illustrate the syncretism and inclusivism in the legacy of Guru. So the 3rd example relates to the honoring of local deities known as Jikintipila and Jikimbila, who are protectors of the local places and belief. Their acceptance And perpetuation, in my view, was not an accident, but an appreciation of by Guru of the diversity of the means as a key value in contextual solutions. To cite a few notable names, out of hundreds of such local earth deities, 12 goddesses of Buddhist doctrine, Genin Chikarwa, Siumar, Nyeshen Thangla, Gawazampo, Yulashampo, Genin Kulakhari, and so forth, and in Bhutan, Songsongma, Timet, Taksin, Kibuluk, Sinterda, Sora. So I won't go into this, but there is enough examples to show the openness of gurus to this ethereal beings which were supposed to have been bound by Guru to protect the local places. Many of the relatively more well-known local deities across the Himalayas have been documented by a scholar called Nebeski, though not their ritual and cultural functions. It is the local rites with regard to these deities in traditional societies that are locally distinctive and has true value to the identities and relational importance to the local ecologies as they regulate human attitude and uses of local ecologies. In the case of Bhutan, we have collected much more information on the population of the local deities and their interaction with and positive impact on microecologies. I have myself done that. Such ecologies associated with earth deities, treasure protectors, contributed positively to micro-kingdoms of plants, animals, and fungal proliferations. Of course, fungal activity is central to plant proliferation. Thus, the pacification of the societies touched by Guru probably enhanced biodiversity, as far as we can deduce from the coexistence of human beings in nature, culture, and biodiversity in the Himalayas so far. But how it will unfold in the future, because some different ideas are also coming, we are not able to say very clearly. The diffusion of Buddhism, especially in Nyingma tradition, seems to have allowed pluralistic and polycentric practices to continue. I should add a cautionary note that Buddhist scholarship and practices tend to take Buddhism to be the only culture a society has, leading to recent discouragement of other ancient practices, rituals, performances, narratives. And I think this is a major mistake and leads to loss of vernacular and valuable forms of culture when such monolithic views are combined with overwhelming authoritarian bureaucracy, which is not very well informed. I'm sure most of you will agree. The fourth and the last example I want to give about this syncretism and inclusivism of Guru Rinpoche is an example drawn on the work of Japanese scholar Yoshiro Imaida. He has done textual analysis of the widespread funeral rite drawing on Bardot Hotel, or the Book of the Dead as it is popularly known, by Karma Lingpa, 14th century Tertons. How we should approach the process of dying, the philosophical view of death. What is death anyway? Is a major distinction feature of any tradition, but I think Buddhism has to offer, Tantric Buddhism especially, has to offer a great deal on this topic. Anyway, my main point is that Imaida shows that Mitukpa, funeral rites of Tibet and Bhutan, follow a book composed by the Indian master Buddha Guhya, who was a contemporary of Guru. What he really shows is that in the Buddha Gaya, as a book, Yesong Dolwa, Jongwa, there is no element where the ritual performers addresses the soul of the dead directly, saying that, "Oh noble son, do you recognize you are in this, you have passed 6 days ago, and so on and so forth. There's a direct dialogue going on. It doesn't exist in Buddha-Gaya's one. But in the old Tibetan prehistoric practice, when a person died, an animal would be sacrificed, because the soul of the animal is to lead the person in the afterlife as a guide. So it is the sort of the invention by Karma Lingpa in the Book of the Dead that this element was incorporated from the ancient Tibetan. So you today have this direct dialogue with the dead. What all this means is that the legacy of Guru allowed such kind of flexibility to incorporate these new elements into Buddhism in Tibet. As regards inclusiveness, let me mention just 2 examples. Firstly, inclusivity led to the emergence of Buddhist luminaries outside India. Until the advent of Guru, all you had was sort of classical Buddhist figures like the 6 ornaments and 2 extraordinary, or 80 Mahasiddhas, or 16 Arahants, etc. But for the first time, Guru's closest 25 disciples, who formed the first glorious set of scholars and practitioners from the Himalayas, is noted. Now, not all 25 closest disciples were Tibetans. One of them was a Mongol. Amongst translators also there is some foreigners, lots of Indians. One of the first 5 monks to be ordained was a Yugir. And it is the emanations of these 25 closest disciples of Guru who began to regenerate Buddhism across the Himalayas and form a new layer of Buddhist understanding and practices. And all of them absorb local influences. This is a key point. Guru himself, as you know, searches for teachers from all across India, such as Pravahasti in Kashmir, Humkara in Nepal, both products of Nalanda. But Guru's main guru was Manjushri Mitra from Udhyana, and Shri Singha, probably from Khotan, but it is written usually as China. And there are many other teachers, Santigarbha, Buddha Guhya, Dharma Sanskrita, Rambhu Guhya, Devachandra, Mahavajra, and so forth. The second feature of inclusivism of Guru was incorporation of individuals of various sects and backgrounds and occupations. Female disciples and consorts of Guru were from places such as Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, and Vanga, that's Bengal. Among his international disciples and disciples and consort, Mandarava of Bengal is very well known. Equally well known is Ishsogel. But the Tashikiden of Bhutan, and the daughter of King Hamre of Mon, is very prominent in the biography of Ishsogel. And it is very fascinating to note in Khandu Ishsogel's biography the reach of Guru to bring people together. For example, Guru instructs Ishsogel to fetch a young man from Kathmandu. His name is Saleh, Acharya Saleh, as to bring him as a meditation partner. And Khandu Ishsogel then treks to Kathmandu, meets the person, pays out almost like a dowry, really, gold dust, a pouch of gold dust to the king. The king releases him, and then he goes, takes him to extreme part of eastern Bhutan called Singizong, and then to Parotaksang. But you cannot imagine, someone called Saleh from Kathmandu roaming around Bhutan in 8th century. His name itself sounds something like Yemeni, President Saleh. We can't now trace what is the etymology behind this. But my main point is that their racial differences, the racial difference of translators, followers, disciples, and consorts really make Guru's association extremely cosmopolitan and international. With respect to inclusiveness of the people of all background, transmission, empowerment and instruction that Guru gave not only consisted of monks but practitioners known as Gomchen, Gyokor, making it possible for farmers and householders to become non-celibate practitioners. I think that is a major social engineering thing. Without that, the health of Buddhism in Tibet would have been questionable. Now, such non-celibate priests or tantric adepts are identified by many external emblematic outfits, like earring, torch knob, hair like sadhus of Kumbh Mela, but they wore clothes. They had like what Rinpoche is wearing now, a white garment, undergarment, and a shawl, but different from the monks. Monks wear red, but the tantric adepts, non-celibate practitioners, white. The white is supposed to symbolize one of the key practices of tantric Buddhism, which is generation of heat, blissful heat, deje, turbo, fierce heat. So it is important to note that the white garment of Gomchen symbolizes the wind and channel exercise for generating heat, namely these two. Once again, one can surmise that practices of breathing as a method towards various objectives, but also continual heat generation for exceptional personal well-being is central to the so-called Yurlam, or the quicker path to certain attainment for the tantric adepts. I'm coming to the end of my time as well as my talk. I would like to now summarize the impact on peace, security, and hidden lands. The concept of personal well-being I mentioned must be broadened to ecologies and communities, and this is done in the concept of hidden lands. I think Ian is there who will elaborate very much on one of the greatest hidden land, the Pema, the sort of in Arunachal. But I think the hidden land, as I said, combines external peace and internal peace together, whereas the normal idea of peace is just absence of conflict free. But without the internal peace, I think the hidden land would also be empty, in my opinion. The Himalayan society that Guru traveled widely were not part of empires, and that left them really free from implicating in major military affairs that consumed Tibet, for example, through the Mongol invasion. They were probably, these Himalayan societies, probably tribal and nomadic societies for most part, and managed by native leadership. But when external conflict takes place, peacemaking should take precedence of task for every leader, including spiritual ones. And peacemaking and conflict prevention are considered quite surprising, this one, in Buddhism, among one of the 10 virtues. That if you can make peace between people, then this is one of the virtues on the equal level as preventing killing and so on and so forth. This is there in the writings of great poet and monk Karma Chame. But it's also appropriate for us to remember this peacemaking function, because our conference is supported by Escalation Centre for Escalation of Peace. And with respect to Bhutan, peacemaking and mediation out of court has not completely died out as a major form of local leadership. And Guru first came to Bhutan to make peace between an Indian ruler and a Bhutanese king, So he was enfolded in his own key works. Now, a major survey by National Legal Institute of Bhutan showed that in 2016 there were 36,250 cases, global number. Out of this, 15,316 were solved through out-of-court mediation. So, local leadership should focus on this, and Guru did that. And as a saying goes, it's better to lose in village than to win in court, because court is, everybody loses, is the idea. And last night, I felt compelled to mention this, because we are in India, that it would be better to lose in village than in court. When I read the incensing case as the one described by Anita Gates Bail by Arun Shuri, where in this particular case you read, the adjudication has become another kind of complete samsara, if you read this book. By definition, the concept of living in hidden land includes both external and internal peace. In the periods of conflict connected to the integration of Tibetan Empire, as well as Mongol invasion, many places came to be valorized or valued as hidden land once visited and blessed by Guru Rinpoche. As you know, Tibet faced a menacing invasion by Mongols, and then major figures of Nyingma, like Longchenpa, fled and came to Bhutan because he saw a miraculous sign in the sky of Guru telling him to go to Bhutan. And he foresaw in his poem written in 1355, and he noted in that poem that the doors to the precious hidden land will be opened very soon. And after that, there was a flood of great Tertons coming to Bhutan, Nyangre Nima, usual Teten Sherab member, and so on and so forth, Ratna Lingpa and such. They considered such places hidden lands because they are away from the empires, embroiled in conflict. They felt that there was a potential to realize the quest for peace, for security, and not only that, these are mundane concerns, but liberation, and visit a place where both physical and mental treasures could be revealed. Hidden treasures as environmental spaces have ontological value, according to Tony Huber. They have special capabilities, these lands, capabilities to hide terror, which will be duly protected by the guardians of the terror. To harbor esoteric beings, not just human beings, but beings which would prevent you becoming too destructive, nerda, terta, so on and so forth. They regulate your behavior, which can get out of hand. And to accelerate the quest for liberation. This is a special quality of this land. Such places are not only relatively hidden from large-scale overt conflicts, but they had this kind of qualities of terror hiding, which were really hidden mostly by Khandu Yishu. But I think today we have to recognize that they are also biodiverse. Biodiverse space means that the living there is less demanding, and working there is also less exacting. But then your demands on the land must also be acceptable level. Otherwise, there is no difference from exploitation of resources. Many ecologically sensitive spots in the Himalayas are associated with mountain hermitages and retreats of Guru and his followers. These places were pacified by them, and it meant these places had the power to pacify human beings and brought peace to them where they took time off to meditate, to breathe properly, and to cultivate the opportunity to lose their constructed identities and resolve their anxieties. Now, many regions in Himachal, Sikkim, Nepal, Bhutan, Arunachal have their own hidden land and their communities whose quest for peace, leisure is the end goal of most human beings, I must say. It's only in leisure we can realize other transcendental goals. Tranquility and longevity, these places guarantee. Gift of nature and self-sufficiency supported by land provide adequacy of livelihood and leisure in this hidden land. But I think the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves whether we want to see this landscape as transfigured hidden lands as more real, or we want to see the so-called developed land with airports, hotels, road and so forth as more real with so much infrastructure. And which one would take us finally towards our intrinsic Buddha nature? That's the fundamental question. You choose, we choose. The ultimate value of the concept and lesson of hidden land might be that land can be more than geological and topographical fact in more than that. And they are more if you see it with a pure vision. If we could see that each patch of environment is unlike any other in the universe, unlike any other valley, mountain, river, grove, because each patch of that environment contain not only those lives that exist there at that moment in history, but will exist in the future, then we could see that as a sacred living landscape, as you do in pure vision, instead of seeing it with the eyes of material and commercial exploitation. I think, sir, will you give me 5 more minutes?
Yes, sure.
I think I want to. I know that I have imposed on your patience because already 1 hour passed. But please give me marginal 5-10 minutes. I am ending now. I would like to end this privilege of making a keynote lecture by touching on terma literature and Tertons, given that terma phenomena arose out of Guru. The Nyingma school of Buddhism associated with Guru and his disciples taps into the deepest part of our consciousness and into visionary experiences. Nangyam, into subconscious and poetic experiences facilitating liberation. In fact, Nyingma Pa's inward journey towards self-discoveries through inner experiences was far less gradualist, far less monastic, and it also meant far less boundary between the lay and the monastery, between the social and the spiritual, and somatic and the psychic. Now most of the contemporary Tertons, especially in Tibet and Kham, have renewed teachings not in established monasteries, but in far-flung religious encampments and mountain hermitages, in settings that really invoke contact with wilderness and pre-modernism. There is a lot of recent works on contemporary Tertons, on their production, their extractions, sometimes somewhat unbelievable if you really follow these accounts, that some Terts are being today taken out, witnessed by public in Kham, by people like Khenpo, Jimmy Phunso, late Jimmy Phunso. So in general, whether it is teaching revelation or physical object revelation, terma tradition stems from the belief that Guru, Yishiso Gyal, Nanam Dujum Dorji, Berechana and so forth, key people deposited and hid theirs somewhere. How was I'm always curious how Yishisogel, Kando Yishisogel was able to memorize, had the capacity to memorize and write the teachings of Guru and then hide them as their. In the biography of Yishisogel by Namkhin Yingpo and Gelwa Jangchup, this feat of writing what she received as teaching from Guru, as well as what she realized from her visionary experience, were due to two things. Her incredible and indelible power of memory that she gained at the end of her attainments in Syncretism in Bhutan. This is Mijizungi Top. She masters that. And the second, which Sarah Jacob alludes to, is that she also developed this abnormal power of encoding vast amount of information. We really do not know what exactly happens to the brain when person gets this power of indelible memory and power of encoding information, because later Tertons then depend on what she has encoded. So in contemporary period, this revelation of their teachings, sometimes from the depth of their mind, sometimes from physical one, is being continued by some 20 great Tertons, I would like to say. And there are also females among them, like Tara Lamo and then late Serakhando, etc. I think in India, I think Tukujimi Rinpoche is there. His eminent father, Dimi Namkha Rinpoche, is a well-known Nyingma Lama who has revealed mind treasures, especially on Gesar cycle. But there are many others who I have not mentioned due to time limits. Now I conclude. In the brochure there is a question about contemporary relevance of Guru. So I just say 1-2 words on that. Asking which legacy of Guru is of contemporary relevance is to ask, what can Vajrayana offer? Is this a fringe activity? What can it offer today in the world of globalization and hyper reality? The speakers in this conference will actually demonstrate in detail its contemporary relevance. But Vajrayana Buddhism is at the end about seeking, to quote Jeffrey Samuel, a scholar on Tantric Buddhism, is about seeking a state of pure vision and seeing the world in its true nature, the true nature that is of Dharmakaya. And once you can see that true nature, then the channels in your body open to the flow of bodhicitta, to the flow of altruistic motivation of the Buddhahood. Padmasambhava could remain the timeless Guru, relevant in the future as it has been in the last 12 centuries. Whenever human beings realize that they have the potential to raise themselves, to have pure vision. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Dasho. May I request Chairperson to please honor our very distinguished speaker with a small gift from us. It's a very small token for our appreciation.